And Michelle Wolf at the White House Correspondents' dinner. Did she go too far or not? Here she is roasting President Trump's press secretary, Sarah Huckabee Sanders.
I actually really like Sarah. I think she's very resourceful. Like, she burns facts, and then she uses that ash to create a perfect smoky eye. Like, maybe she's born with it. Maybe it's lies. It's probably lies.
Is that going too far? Do you want your comedy that pointed and that accusatory?
I thought it was funny as a fight, frankly, and actually the funniest thing was watching the face of Sarah Huckabee Sanders as she was forced to sit there and listen to it from just a few feet away. I mean, I did feel a little bit sorry for her, but she was really brilliant, I thought, Michelle Wolf. And yes, you know, it's provocative and everything, but isn't that what you want your comedians to be? It was funny.
There were some good gags. Trump wants to give teachers guns, and I support that because they then can sell them for things they need, like supplies.
That's very clever.
The ones that have been singled out, I suppose, are the more provocative one, including that smoky eye one, because, of course, predictably, Twitter erupted and said that she was being body shamed and all sorts of other things, which I don't think happened at all. But, yes, I gather the longer watch, Jim, that you have watched has got some rather brilliant gags in it.
Yeah, well, I mean, unless you're of a sensitive disposition, and a lot of people are, obviously, it possibly is worth a watch to get the full context of it all. I didn't know what a smoky eye was until today.
Do you now?
I do now.
What is it?
Informed by the women in the newsroom.
How would you describe it?
It's eye makeup, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah, a particular kind, but that's good stab at it.
Oh, that's about as close as I can get. So you didn't watch it, Peter. I'm just interested in whether you think comedy reaches a limit of decency and taste and cruelty, and whether she probably stepped over it. I don't know.
I think there is a limit to comedy, but I don't think this stepped over it. I think Sarah Huckabee Sanders, if anyone can take this, given what she dishes out, she's fair game.
Before we go, some discussion today about the hard lives now of early childhood teachers. Injuries courtesy of aggressive children, like biting, back injuries from carrying children, stress galore, hearing damage. You wouldn't think about this, would you, from the noise of small people gathered en masse in confined conditions. 46% of ECE teachers with problems, compared with 29% 3 years ago. Staff under 25 most likely to report workplace harm, with a 70% injury rate. So life as an ECE teacher doesn't seem appealing when you read just the stats. Do you wonder what's happened to this sector? I'm asking you broad questions today, aren't I? Any theories? It seems a bit sad.
It does, particularly for an industry that's, you know, traditionally pretty poorly paid. To be putting up with that kind of workplace injury rate seems extraordinary, doesn't it? I don't know what's caused it to. I mean, I remember when my kids were little in childcare, there were some pretty horrendous things that would happen. The biting wasn't always of the teachers, sometimes it was of each other. So it's a fraught environment, that early childhood one.
On the whole, it seemed to be more genteel back then, or maybe that's rose-coloured.
I don't know.
Glasses.
Spectacles. There must be lots of upside, though.
Oh, yeah.
ECE.
Yeah, we didn't mean to imply it was.
No, I mean, I have the utmost of admiration for them. I just think they deserve to be paid more.
Yeah, which is what the union's saying. Peter Weil, nice to have you on the panel.
Thank you, Jim.
Nice to see you again. And Paula Penfold, nice to see you as always.
Thank you for having me, Jim.
A great pleasure. We're back tomorrow. Thanks for listening to us, everybody. And Checkpoint is on the way.
Ko te marae, hoa mai he kōrero kei te haere hei kaupapa kei te karawhiua tonight on Checkpoint. And thank you for joining us. Energy Minister Megan Woods summons BP to her office after an internal email leaked to staff reveals the fuel company's tactics to reduce sales losses. And on a trip up the Kapiti coast today, we find a price difference of 18 cents at BP petrol stations over just 40k. Also tonight, at least 20 Nongataha homes could be uninhabitable after the area received its biggest rainfall in a day in more than 50 years. Auckland councillors vote in favour of a fuel tax. Road workers dig up a Waka. Auckland University students march to save their libraries. And she's back. Lydia Ko wins her first LGPA title in nearly 2 years.
RNZ News at 5 o'clock. Good afternoon, I'm Anna Thomas. The Prime Minister says many New Zealanders would view BP's petrol pricing as unfair. An internal email leaked to staff revealed BP was going to raise prices in Paraparaumu, Kapiti and Levin to reduce the pricing gap with Otaki, hoping its competitors would follow suit. The Energy Minister is still considering recommendations arising from last year's petrol price inquiry. And there's legislation before Parliament giving the Commerce Commission more power to compel companies to hand over commercial information. Jacinda Ardern says it's not clear yet whether the behaviour is legal, but it's certainly unfair.
To hear so blatantly that pricing decisions are being made that sit outside of the price of crude oil, that sit outside the exchange rate, or that sit outside, for instance, operating costs, will no doubt be raising eyebrows with consumers.
Jacinda Ardern. BP says discounting has led to prices becoming unsustainable in the lower North Island last year, and so it adjusted its prices. At least 20 homes have been severely damaged in the flooding that hit the Bay of Plenty town of Nongataha yesterday. Civil Defence says that number could rise as more homeowners contact the council. The Mayor, Steve Chadwick, says the district could not have prepared for the amount of rain that hit over the weekend.
How tumultuous it was. We know that we got 1.5 times the national average of rainfall in a day that we've ever seen in April. You can't foresee that deluge of water and the effect.
Steve Chadwick has asked the government to contribute to a Merrill Relief Fund. The Transport Minister is demanding National explain how it would fund Auckland's huge transport projects without a regional fuel tax. Auckland councillors have voted to push ahead with the tax, and they'll now seek public views on how it should be spent. The 11.5 cents a litre excise is expected to generate $1.5 billion over the next decade and will be supplemented by income from the government and from property developments. The Minister, Phil Twyford, says National needs to be more specific about which projects it would scrap.
He's got to find $4.3 billion that the regional fuel tax unlocks, and he's promised $10.5 billion in hand-picked expressway projects that he's been going around the country promising, on top of the existing land transport program. Where's the money going to come from?
Transport Minister Phil Twyford. There's a call for schools to get more support to help children affected by methamphetamine. The president of the Te Tai Tokoro Principals Association says every primary school class in the area has children either going without or struggling with behavioural problems because of meth use at home. Pat Newman wants more information on the impact meth has on children and more funding to address the issues.
We actually do not really know whether it's long-term like fetal alcohol or whether it's short-term, whether it's long-lasting or there's no research done on it. And the other difficulty is if there's no funding out there to do the research and there's no funding out there to take care of the problem once it's identified anyway.
Pat Newman says the problem has been hidden by governments and he hopes the new one will confront the issue. And that story was part of Broken Bad, RNZ's in-depth look at New Zealand's meth problem. For more, visit rnz.co.nz. Kaikoura's mayor says he's open to the idea of his ratepayers helping to fund Christchurch's new stadium. The stadium is expected to cost hundreds of millions of dollars, and the Minister for Greater Christchurch Regeneration has said that cost could be partially met by a regional rate. Many of the region's mayors have told RNZ News they're not keen on the idea. However, Kaikoura's mayor, Winston Gray, says large events like the recent Ed Sheeran concerts in Dunedin benefit all nearby districts.
Timaru, Waimate, Oamaru benefit from that. Same as we have when there's an event in Christchurch, people coming from Marlborough, Wellington down through here. We sell fuel, we sell food. So, that's how I look at it. We're all in it together.
Winston Gray. 2 explosions have hit the Afghan capital of Kabul during the morning rush hour, killing at least 4 people and injuring 5. The attacks came just a week after a blast at a voter registration centre killed 60 people ahead of parliamentary elections planned in October. It's 5 past 5. The New Zealand golfer Lydia Ko says everything fell into place to break her tournament win drought. Former world #1 Ko took out the Mediheal Championship in San Francisco this morning in a sudden death playoff, her first win on the LPGA Tour for 21 months. Ko hit a stunning second shot on the first playoff hole to clinch the win and says it was a satisfying moment.
I saw the crowd reaction, and I know if the ball kicked left from where it landed, it could have gone in the bunker, which is the worst place to hit it for that pin position. So for it to kick straight and be close and nice and tied up to that pin, everything that could have happened went the right way for me.
Lydia Ko. World and Commonwealth Games shot put champion Tom Walsh is vowing to make 2018 his own after suffering his first defeat of the season. Walsh came second at the Drake Relays meet in the United States, beaten in his first head-to-head with arch rival and Olympic champion American Ryan Krauser. While frustrated with the result, Walsh says he has still had an amazing start to the year.
This year we're trialling a few things because there's no major champs. I've done my major champs, so there's no point. So we're going to trial something a little bit different and really go after it because, as I said before, I'm bigger, faster, stronger. I'm throwing better technically, my timing's better. So I feel like I've got more to give still. I'm looking forward to this year. It's going to be fun.
Tom Walsh. And Des Hasler has ruled himself out of the running for the vacant New Zealand coaching role after indicating a desire to return to the National Rugby League. Hasler was considered a candidate to take the Kiwis' job after meeting with the New Zealand Rugby League last week. And that's the news.
A superhero
rescued off the roof of a tractor, which was a bit embarrassing. The neighbours came to our rescue and then the fire brigade pulled us across.
New warriors.
But this isn't a matter of catch and burn and all that sort of stuff. This is a matter of just a smooth transition.
And old rockets.
This is all an elaborate process under which the weird-looking, cruel dictator comes to be accepted. When one has watched Rambo 1, 2 and 3, by the time Rambo 4 comes around, one has a pretty good idea how it's going to end.
Fire up with Morning Reports. Guy and Espiner and Susie Ferguson, weekdays from 6.
Then on 9 to noon, the second-tier airlines stepping into the region say they need more support from the government. And after 10, did journalists contribute to Hillary Clinton's defeat? We talked to the New York Times lead reporter on Clinton's campaign, who's just written a tell-all memoir. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
And now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland, Auckland, Coromandel, mostly cloudy, scattered showers, possibly heavy, clearing in the Coromandel and Auckland tomorrow afternoon. Waka to Kapiti, including Bay of Plenty, Taupo, Taumaranui and Taihape. A few showers, some heavy about the central North Island, gradually clearing tomorrow with increasing fine spells. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay, Waiata Upper and Wellington, occasional rain, possibly heavy in Waiata Upper, easing to isolated showers in Gisborne and Hawke's Bay this evening and elsewhere tomorrow morning. Marlborough, Nelson, Buller, Northern Westland, occasional rain, possibly heavy about Buller and Northern Westland, clearing in western areas tonight and elsewhere tomorrow morning. For Southern Westland, Fiordland, mainly fine but occasional rain developing in Fiordland tomorrow. For Canterbury, mostly cloudy, scattered rain north of Ashburton, clearing this evening, the odd shower possible tomorrow evening. Otago and Southland, cloudy periods, brief rain tomorrow afternoon, and for the Chatham Islands, a chance of a shower, then rain later tomorrow. RNZ National, it's 5:09, and you're listening to Checkpoint with John Campbell.
And Anna Thomas, thank you very much indeed, Anna, and thank you everyone for being with us. We begin tonight with petrol prices. Auckland's fuel tax coming up, by the way. But first, Energy Minister Megan Woods has summoned BP to her office following this internal email leaked to staff, which revealed the company's tactics to reduce sales losses north of Wellington. The email written last year revealed BP was going to raise prices in Kapiti and Levin to reduce the pricing gap with Otaki, and hoped its competitors would follow suit. At the time, petrol prices between Otaki and Levin differed by up to 20 cents a litre. And those of you who know the area will know it isn't a very big stretch of road. BP refused to be interviewed today, but in a statement said petrol prices were highly competitive and the company adjusted its prices in response to local competition, particularly in instances where discounting had become unsustainable, which is what it says occurred in the lower North Island last year. Would love them to elaborate on that. We'll keep trying. In a moment, we'll hear from the AA, but first we went between the Kapiti coast and Horowhenua to look at the variation in BP's prices. 93 kilometres north of Wellington at the BP petrol station in Levin this afternoon, our video journalist Richard Tinderler found Unleaded 91 fuel for $1.99 a litre, $1.99. Just 20k south in Otaki at another BP petrol station, the same fuel, 7 cents more, $2.06 a litre. And 23k south of Otaki in Paraparaumu, again at another BP, the same fuel was 11 cents more expensive at $2.17 a litre. So travel 40k north from Paraparaumu and save 18 cents a litre on the same fuel from the same petrol company. BP customers in Paraparaumu told our reporter Richard, well, our video journalist Richard, they weren't happy about it.
I deal here all the time, living on the beach here, but I don't think it's fair. I think it should be general right through, you know, and then we don't have to worry about it. But it's being a pensioner, you've got to watch every little cent, and no, I don't think it's fair.
Because there's a Gull service station there, that the others have dropped their price. So the interesting thing is the fact that they can drop their price. So obviously they're making a lot of extra out of it, but I don't know. This is what competition will do for us. It'll bring prices down to a level that the market can stand.
Well, obviously it's not fair, but why the difference? I don't know. Yeah.
Would you be willing to go to living for that, or to change?
If I'm in the VIN, I always make sure I've got I fill up there if I'm in the area. Yeah, but I wouldn't make a special trip.
We just pay what we have to pay. You know, we haven't got sort of. If people had a choice, clearly they would go to the service station where it's cheaper. I mean, there's no difference in quality or the product.
The other fuel stations they have up there are obviously driving the price down. Yeah, so there's obviously not competition here.
It seems a bit kind of inexplicable, doesn't it? Really? Yeah. I don't know. I drive quite a distance, but yeah. I'd rather not pay it. I don't think anybody would really, would they?
We've been rorted. Yeah. Somebody's taking the extra. But I think the discounting scheme also is probably part of it. They're building in the discounts into the price, so. But you still get the discounts in the VIN, so I don't know.
So what does BP say? Well, they wouldn't front, but their website tells us they currently operate more than 90 BP Connect stores in New Zealand. They're part, of course, of BP Global, who just had a bumper year with a reported profit figure of $6.2 billion. That appears not to have bought them the services of someone who can do a media interview. So we went to AA instead, and I asked Mark Stockdale, who's AA's principal advisor regulations and speaks on petrol pricing for AA, what he makes of the striking regional difference in petrol prices as, for example, you head north from Wellington to Levin.
The AA would say that the key reason for that is the presence of a low-cost discount brand that typically operates unmanned service stations. And Gull would be the best example of that, and that's well known. And in Levin, the Gull service station is an unmanned service station, but there are other discount brands too that also operate unmanned service stations. And the AA's view has always been that an unmanned service station, which is a much smaller service station, it doesn't have a shop, doesn't employ staff. Our view is that they have lower overheads, and therefore the price of fuel should be lower to reflect that. And it is. But the converse is that if it's a full service station, a big site, lots of staff, then the price is probably going to be higher. And typically that's true, except where those two competing offers, an unmanned and a manned service station, are both operating in the same vicinity. And what you tend to see happen is the manned service station will choose to match the lower cost discount brand, probably because they know if they don't match the price, everyone will drive half a K down the road to the other brand. And they don't want to lose sales, so they compete on price. That's good for the consumer in that area. But those big brands with manned service stations, they probably can't afford to match that price because they can't match those lower costs. So they end up charging a higher price across other parts of the network where they don't compete with those unmanned service stations.
My understanding was, though, that the shops can be more profitable than the petrol, that in fact the retailer can make more money on the biscuits or the wine gums or the Coca-Cola or the cigarettes they're selling than they can on the petrol. And
Well,
aren't
we
you
have no
somewhat
differences of that,
overstating?
yes.
I mean, look, our local petrol stations have one and sometimes two people in them earning much, not much more than the minimum wage, I suspect. Isn't this overstating somewhat the cost of running those operations?
Well, I think this is the unknown question. So last year, the previous government commissioned an independent review into fuel prices and margins, and they tried to obtain a lot of confidential, detailed information from the fuel companies, including Gull, because they have a different operating model than the big brands, to try and get a handle on fuel prices and margins. They couldn't get all the information they needed, so the report was a little bit non-committal in the end. This is the sort of thing that we would like to have a better understanding of. It would be really a simple question that the AA would like answered, and that is, what is the cost of supplying fuel in, say, an expensive, pretty expensive city like Auckland? I mean, it's certainly got very high housing costs. What is the cost of supplying fuel in a city like Auckland, in a high-profile area with high land costs, where probably the staff wages, while they won't be, huge, they're probably a bit higher than staff wages in say, Levin. And compare it with the cost of supplying fuel.
Sorry, do you know any of the stuff, or is this just speculative?
No, we don't. The fuel companies do, and we'd like.
Have you asked the fuel companies these questions?
Oh, well, they're not going to give it to us.
So have you asked them? Have you asked them? I just wonder, forgive me, and I'm not giving you a hard time, because no one doubts that the AA provides a fantastic service, but are you compromised in your ability to do a kind of really effective whistleblowing job here, or to speak truth to power, or to effectively scrutinise the petrol companies by the fact that you work so closely with them? On your AA website, for example, you're advertising the AA Smart Fuel card, which offers discounts of 6 cents a litre at BP. Does that compromise your ability to be whistleblower here? Well,
not when we're talking about all of the fuel retail market. So we don't have any relationship with Zed or Mobil or Gull, and so we just put that aside and say, well, we're looking at the overall retail market and raising concerns as we see them across the retail market and not just one particular brand. So we put that aside, and the question has to be asked was, well, if we did have that relationship, what we do, why is it then that some of the other brands that we have no relationship, why are their prices the same?
And what's the answer to that question? Because that's the key question. Is why is it that once you get into a region, you cross the lines from the Kapiti into the Horowhenua region, the prices change across the board?
And our belief is that is entirely due to the level of competition and the presence of a low-cost brand with an unmanned service station. That's what we think it's down to, but we don't understand what those costs are and how they differ, and how much of those costs are due to the additional staff and the size of the shop, and as you say, or whether in fact they're making all their money on the shop. We just don't know that. No one does except the industry. But more transparency around how they determine prices in those locations and what the overheads in those locations are would certainly help.
That's the AA's Mark Stockdale. We'll have Benedict Collins, our political reporter, filing on the politics of this a little later. Lots of feedback already coming in. Dunnyburg, which is on the other side of the lower North Island, they say you drive north into the Southern Hawke's Bay and you pay much less, and people in Wanaka saying $2.32 a litre. Whoa. Auckland councillors gave a regional fuel tax a green light today. We'll have more on that from Auckland correspondent Todd Nile after 5:30, which is not far away. A massive clean-up job is underway in Nongotaha, north of Rotorua, after torrents of floodwater, more than 1 metre deep, rushed through the streets, flooding properties and houses. The heaviest rainfall in more than 50 years struck the region yesterday, revealing true horror for the residents in Western Road and its surrounding streets. Our reporter Andrew McRae has been in the area today talking to locals who are facing, well, really a bit of a personal nightmare.
The sound of Ben Baker's car being lifted onto a tow truck and destined to be written off after water and mud caused severe damage. It was one of 3 cars he has lost to the floodwaters.
They're all totaled, mate. Once it gets past sort of halfway up the cars, there's no point in restoring them. It'll cost too much.
Well, they're taking a car away at the moment on a truck. How do you feel seeing it go?
It's kind of heartbreaking because I got it less than a month ago.
He says the torrent of water that struck was very strong.
That's the problem is last night when I was walking back round, waist-high water, torrential. It was just a huge torrent pushing you back that way towards the stream.
Kerry Ann lives in Western Road.
I was actually sitting at my computer studying, and I heard a crash, and it was the wheelie bins floating into the car, and within half an hour we were evacuated.
She wasn't looking forward to returning home this morning.
Chaos, it looks like a bomb's gone off in it. And
did the water and mud get inside?
Yeah, not right through my house. I'm lucky that I'm a little bit higher than everybody else, but it's made it, through my kitchen and into my carpet, and it got into my car, so I think my car's probably done.
Don Newport's home survived, but his basement garage didn't fare so well. So that's it's a block wall, and so it's 3 blocks up, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
So that would be metre?
Yeah, getting close to metre. What they're over 8-inch blocks, aren't they? What 3/8? Well, you can see on the cupboard there, on that one there. See, it's about the same. Again,
wow.
That's where it got to.
And like any garage, it's where you store your stuff?
Yeah, we've got deep freezers and all in there, washing machines, clothes dryers. We got in there with spare blankets and things, and another cupboard and wardrobe thing.
Around the corner on Brookdale Road, Nigel Cayley was coming to terms with what had happened.
About 4 o'clock, this was about ankle deep in water, and by the time we left at about 5:30, it was basically easy to see where the water is there. So it's about mid-thigh.
So probably a metre?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. And it was just torrent through here, all through the car, to the garage. As you can see, the water line on the fence. That's how high it got in the backyard.
And destroyed the garden at the front?
Yeah, totally.
You got a camper van out there, water in there?
Haven't checked it yet.
I think your wife said it might have been got water in.
It was starting to float, so yeah, I'm a bit dubious about opening the door, but yeah.
Much get into the house itself?
Yeah, a little bit, but not as bad as what we thought.
Civil Defence says they are now in recovery mode. Controller Bruce Horn says the effects the flooding has had on some people is heartbreaking.
The good thing is that no one's been harmed through this, and our primary mission yesterday was about the welfare and safety of people. Now it's safety is less of an issue. It's still a factor and people can underestimate that, but the main focus is actually the welfare of our people.
The Mayor Steve Chadwick says the city just could not have prepared for the amount of rain that fell over such a short period.
It was just simply too much water too quickly. Council can't stop the volume of water that was unleashed on this district yesterday.
The Mayor has asked the government to contribute to a mayoral relief fund. Civil Defence estimate that about 20 homes have been severely damaged, but they're still hearing from homeowners. In Rotorua for Checkpoint, ko Andrew McRae-Tene.
Coming up to 23 minutes past 5. The methamphetamine epidemic sweeping the country is so pervasive now, there are even reports of children taking the drug to school. And as part of RNZ's Broken Bad project, an in-depth look at New Zealand's meth problem, Charlie Drever spoke to people who had been addicted to meth from childhood. Charlie filed this report.
In an ideal world, primary school children would be worrying about what's for lunch and who will kick around a ball at recess. But for many students, reality is much more grim, and that's often because of methamphetamine. Khan Steiner is one example.
I was a 6-year-old kid selling meth with my dad while my mum worked as a prostitute in the clubs. And by about the age of 15, 16, I'd become fully addicted to methamphetamine. I learned how to cook methamphetamine by the time I was 16.
The former addict now works to help others kick the habit. Social worker Fiona Watson says the problem with children is getting worse.
Unfortunately, we've heard stories about kids taking stuff to school to maybe take to their aunties after school or uncles. This is like 10, 11-year-olds.
And it's not only children using or carrying meth that's a problem. Te Tai Tokoro Principals Association President Pat Newman hasn't seen meth in schools, but says every class in the north has children affected by their parents' drug use.
It can be right up to the children being involved in picking up the fumes, or even if mum's been having it and she's been pregnant. We don't even know the effects of that these days. So, it's such a wide area that no work has ever been done on, and we don't really know about it. But I would say if you're talking impact from lack of food, parenting, through to the very worst parts of P impact on kids, 1 or 2 in a classroom would be minimum.
Mr Newman says the students affected by meth use tend to have stunted development.
Their socialisation skills are sort of at the 1 to 2 year old age. We're getting an effect through increased violence within the children and irrationality. That's also a sign when generally the children need some other care taken of them, such as lack of food, things like that.
And Dennis Mokaleo of Petrol, a group of former addicts trying to help others give up the drug, says the government's focus is all wrong.
Well, whether all the money's going to law enforcement to try and fight war on importing, whether you stop it or not, which you would never stop a drug, it's not going to stop people that knowing how to cook it. You've got 14-year-olds crystallising their neuron. Our youngest walk-in is 8. Our oldest is 68.
Mr Mokaleo says there needs to be more anti-P education in schools. He's asking Te Puni Kukiri, the Māori Affairs Ministry, for help.
Hopefully our presentation will convince them, at least let us start into our Māori schools. Because if the government don't want us to help society, then we need to focus on our people first then.
New Zealand Principals Federation President Fatu Cormack says dealing with children born to P-addicted parents is a growing problem.
Increasingly we're hearing from colleagues across the country about the concern that they have with children presenting at school who, as awful as it sounds, are P babies. And so the challenge that we have is finding appropriate supports from psychologists and special education services to help schools and teachers deal with the challenges that these young children are presenting.
Mr Cormack says there's lots of research into fetal alcohol syndrome, but very little on the impacts of methamphetamine.
Because there's not a bank of knowledge in terms of research, teachers are often feeling around in the dark for strategies that work. And I've heard from some colleagues that the only thing they can do to calm these young people is to rub their backs. And so one behaviour, one child to the next child presents different behaviours. So the sooner we get some research around this, the better support will be put in place for these young people.
All those spoken to agree funding is needed in this area, but they also say it's up to the communities to say enough is enough. For Checkpoint, Charlie Drever.
That report was part of Broken Bad, which is RNZ's look at the country's methamphetamine problem under the chairwomanship of Veronica Schmidt. Some top work there, and you can find it on rnz.co.nz, our website. Of course, by golly, there's a lot of feedback coming in on petrol prices. An enormous amount. People not really persuaded by the AA's take on the regional differences either. We'll bring you a sample of that after the headlines. But let's go to Lydia Ko, which is a wonderful story, really. New Zealand golfer Lydia Ko was once again a winner on the world's biggest women's golf tour this morning, prevailing in a sudden death playoff at an event in San Francisco, and by golly she did. Given it was the 15th LPGA Tour win of her career, you'd be forgiven for thinking it was not a surprising result. But it came after a winless and often frustrating 21 months, and it was undoubtedly really special for the newly turned 21-year-old from Auckland's North Shore. Clay Wilson reports.
She's the lady of the lake. Lydia Ko wins for the 3rd time at Lake Merced, and this one may be the sweetest of them all.
Less than 2 years ago, Lydia Ko was almost untouchable at the pinnacle of women's golf. Still just 19, the young Kiwi prodigy had 2 major championship crowns, 12 other LPGA tournament wins, and a vice-like grip on the #1 spot in the global rankings. So after finally breaking a win drought stretching 43 events, during a period where she slipped no less than 17 places in the world order, there was understandable emotion.
I cried like 4 times in the span of 2 minutes, which is kind of embarrassing. But every time I see my sister, I'd cry. Every time I see my mom, I'd cry. And then Ted, my coach, was crying, so then I cried again. I'm like, God, get a hold of yourself.
They were feelings intensified by the day she had been through. Ko started the final round with a 1-shot lead, but dropped 4 shots during her first 11 holes before rallying to produce a strong finish and a stunning second shot on the first playoff hole. Renowned for her calm on-course demeanour, Ko says that was crucial to ensuring she came out on top.
I was really scrambling. You know, a lot of thoughts were going through my head, but I knew that, hey, as long as there's a hole in front of me, I know that, you know, it gives me another birdie opportunity. But, you know, I just tried to, you know, enjoy it, and, you know, I just tried to keep a smile on my face.
Something that was easier to do after some wise words from Mum Tina, which Ko says also helped her return to the winner's circle.
Sometimes self-pressure is the biggest thing, where you kind of put a lot of load on your shoulders, and that's what my mom actually said. Hey, you know, just clear your mind, you know, just take away all the weight off your shoulders and just go out and play. And that's what I think I was able to do this week, which is always nice when you're kind of playing without fear.
That carefree attitude didn't go unnoticed elsewhere. New Zealand golf analyst and former PGA Tour winner Phil Tautarangi believes Ko's body language said a lot.
It's just a nice little weight off her shoulders so that she can actually just go out and play. What I saw out of her is that her confidence has come back, her lightness on the golf course, where she's back to being a kid again, even though she's now turned 21. And I think everyone around the LPGA Tour know that if Lydia's in good spirits and her confidence is up, then multiple victories come out the backside of that.
And while Tautarangi says it's hard to say what this means for Ko going forward, he has no doubt it is a very positive sign.
It feels like her game is better now than it was even when she was winning 14 titles. And I think what we saw out of her performance today is that this is the first time for a long time where, you know, she's maybe moved her game to the next level. Is the sort of stuff we saw out of Lydia when she was, you know, dominating the world rankings.
Although she surely wants more success to follow, for now Ko is shying away from predicting that. After a challenging couple of years where she made numerous changes to her game and the support team around her, and was constantly questioned about just that, the overriding emotion to ride out the tough times was clear.
It's a huge relief because people are like, hey, because of this, you're not winning. Because of that, you're not winning. No, actually, I tried to stay away from, you know, all the media and everything that was, you know, being said about me. And I knew that my game was there, but I just kind of need to put the pieces together. And just going into today, I said, hey, no matter what happens, it's actually nice to play for the trophy on a Sunday.
Ko collects more than $300,000 for this morning's win, taking her career earnings to almost $13 million. The LPGA Tour's next event starts on Friday in Texas. For Checkpoint, Clay Wilson.
You are with Checkpoint and RNZ, and thank you for being with us. Coming up, roadworkers unearth an unfinished Waka. Auckland's regional fuel tax gets a green light, and Britain's Windrush scandal claims the scalp of a senior cabinet minister. We'd love your feedback, and we sure are getting it on fuel prices. You can text us 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. We're on Facebook, Checkpoint with John Campbell, or email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. Nona doing business this week. She's on one side of me. On the other side with the headlines is Anna Thomas.
Thanks, John. The Prime Minister says BP's price setting without reference to the price of crude or to inflation would be seen by many as unfair. A leaked internal email has revealed BP was planning to raise prices in 3 Kapiti Coast towns to reduce the pricing gap, with a 4th hoping its competitors would follow suit. The Energy Minister is still considering recommendations arising from last year's petrol price inquiry. And legislation before Parliament would give the Commerce Commission more power to compel companies to hand over commercial information. The Rotorua mayor says at least 20 homes have been severely damaged in a deluge that hit the Bay of Plenty town of Northcote yesterday. Steve Chadwick says the district could not have prepared for the amount of rain that hit over the weekend. She says the district got 1.5 times the national rainfall in one April day, a flood which was absolutely unpredictable. Civil Defence says the number of damaged houses could rise as more homeowners contact the council. A call for more support for schools dealing with children affected by a meth epidemic. The president of Te Tai Taukaro Principals Association says every primary school class in the far north has either children going without or struggling with behavioural problems because of methamphetamine use at home. Pat Newman says not enough is known about its effects and whether they're short or long term, and there's also no funding to address the problem. Kaikoura's mayor says he's open to the idea of his ratepayers helping to fund Christchurch's new stadium. The stadium is expected to cost hundreds of millions of dollars, and the Minister for Greater Christchurch Regeneration says that cost could be partially met by a regional rate. Many of the region's mayors have told RNZ News they're not keen on the idea. However, Winston Gray of Kaikoura says large events like the recent Ed Sheeran concerts in Dunedin benefit all nearby districts. And that's the news.
Thank you very much indeed, Anna Thomas. Dave Greenberg has tweeted, and I drove from Wellington to Palmerston north of Savo and drove past the Highway 57 turnoff so I could get cheaper fuel in Levin. People comparing fuel prices in Cromwell and Wanaka. Bizarrely large differences, Nona.
I don't have a car.
No, you don't, do you?
No.
Sensible woman. Sensible woman in all sorts of ways, Nona Peltier. More heads roll at AMP and the unfolding scandal in Australia's banking and financial services industry. We were looking at this last week. We did an amazing interview out of Sydney on it. It is absolutely fascinating. What's the latest?
Well, the latest is that the chair of AMP, Catherine Brenner, she's resigned. She's stepping down. And yeah, well, you know, fair enough. The chief executive went a couple of weeks ago, and the company secretary too is a goner. He's the general counsel.
I don't mean to be rude, but it is rare to see so many people saying, yes, the buck does stop with me. The chair, the CEO and the secretary, goodness gracious.
Yes, well, it's quite a scandal, really. Yeah. I mean, they were charging clients fees for services they never got, and then they lied to the commission about it. So there you go. I mean, they lied to regulators, and then, yeah, so they've paid the price.
It was cynical, wasn't it? It was absolutely rapaciously cynical.
But they're not the only ones. The Commonwealth Bank earlier had disclosed that it was charging fees to clients who were dead. Yeah, so, you know, and more will unfold. This is going to go on for some time.
And the fascinating thing is fascinating watching the politicians, many of whom opposed this forum, actually now lining up behind it.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Well, yes, indeed. So, I mean, that's going to, we're going to see that happening for a while. And at the same time, the company also cut their directors' fees by a quarter for the rest of the year. And they've also said that they're going to repay their wronged customers. They so far have paid out $5 million to 15,000 affected customers. It's a lot.
Thanks. And we'll go back to Australia on this. It's thoroughly entertaining as well as being very important.
Yeah, well, and we're entertaining from here because we haven't seen that kind of behaviour from our financial institutions in New Zealand. And we did talk to the banking sector, the financial services, and it doesn't seem to have bubbled up here. Now, that doesn't mean it doesn't go on, but there's no evidence that it has. And certainly there hasn't been a groundswell of customer complaints to the market regulators here. So one would think that this is happening in Australia and hopefully not happening here. But if it was happening here, it wouldn't be so funny.
No, it wouldn't.
No.
Business confidence down, all sectors posting a negative outlook. What's driving the sentiment here?
Yeah, well, it's mostly associated with the construction sector, believe it or not. I mean, the numbers are well down. A net 23% are pessimistic about the economy. And that's not just about the economy, but also in their own businesses. The pessimism has definitely risen, and all the sectors were pessimistic. The services sector were the least pessimistic, agriculture the most, but in between, the construction sector does seem to be dragging down the mood. And that's partly because prices are up, but the ability to pass them on to the consumer is less so, and that whether that's a contractor to a builder or whatever. We saw that with Fletcher Building. We've seen problems with Metro Performance Glass. We've seen problems with Steel and Tube, and these are the public listed companies. And yeah, we're seeing a lot of concern in the sector for sure, and I think this is going to go on for a while. So a bit of a concern, especially leading into later this week. We're going to have labour markets survey with and what the expectations are for there. Certainly, yeah, right across the board, there's all kinds of concern about whether or not there's going to be hiring, and yeah, it's definitely not a very upbeat market report. Now, it's concerning that the construction sector is in that position because we need that. We need houses and accommodation, all sorts of things. Yeah. Now look at this. I've buried my report for the
the markets. Is that what have you got the markets there?
I got it handy. Yes, I do. Okay, so what do we have here? Yeah, the top 50 index rose 73 points, up 0.9%. And that was possible. That was a lot of it was on Asian markets in with peace, and the Korean Peninsula really made a big impact there. Ended on 8,444. Our dollar is 70.8 US cents, 93.5 Australian and 51.3 pence.
Nona Peltier, thank you very much indeed, Nona. See you tomorrow. Auckland's regional fuel tax has been given a green light by councillors, paving the way for a fortnight, yes, just a fortnight of public consultation to start. All but 2 councillors decided to seek the views of the public on how the $1.5 billion raised would be spent over the next decade. The council has to take a final vote on the 11.5 cent a litre tax at the end of the month, but the National Party has already pledged to scrap it if re-elected. Our Auckland correspondent Todd Nile reports.
In a debate lasting just 18 minutes, even councillors against the fuel tax let it go another round. Manarewa Papakura Ward's Daniel Newman would prefer instead to increase property rates by a further 14% to raise the same amount of money.
I would sooner pass that cost on to the ratepayer, such as Housing New Zealand in my ward, than the tenants of Housing New Zealand in my ward who are going to have to pay at the pump.
Albany Ward Councillor John Watson backed it, but found it ironic that those least likely to be hit by the tax could be the main beneficiaries.
In the city suburbs where there is a lot more choice in terms of trains and buses, so it is a rather unusual feature that those people then won't really be getting asked to contribute at all. Same with people who can afford to drive electric cars, who tend to be a little bit more affluent than others, I would say.
Aucklanders will have to be quick and engaged to have a say. The full information will be available only online or to read at council facilities. One of the tax's biggest contributions will be to a road safety push aimed at cutting deaths and injury, along with a third batch of electric trains and new bus links to the airport. Some councillors are struggling to get their head around the tax and where it would go. Rodney Ward's Greg Sayers was one of only 2 councillors to vote against it going out for public consultation.
It's going to hit Aucklanders in their wallets, hard-working Aucklanders. Most of it's going into a multi-billion-dollar tram to the airport.
In fact, light rail will be paid for by the government and not the Auckland fuel tax. The regional tax is backed by councillors from some of Auckland's poorest areas. Josephine Bartley represents communities such as Glen Innes in the Maungakeakea ward.
I know the cost that this is going to put on a lot of families, a lot of low-income families, a lot of families who live in cars. But I see the point of why we have a regional fuel tax, because it is about the future and it's about progress. And I know that my community support that.
Earlier in the day, the national leader Simon Bridges said the regional fuel tax was not needed and his party would scrap it if re-elected.
We've got a situation at the moment with rising revenues, with hard-working Kiwis not needing to pay yet another tax. Actually, if you manage things well, if you don't have the wrong kind of spending, you can do infrastructure and you don't need new taxes.
The Transport Minister, Phil Twyford, responded by pointing to the breadth of support among Auckland councillors today.
Including 6 National Party aligned councillors. It's a victory for progress. They've stood up for their communities, for their constituents who are stuck in gridlock, and they've seen through Simon Bridges' bluster and petty politicking.
As Aucklanders have a quick say on the tax, government officials are drafting the enabling legislation, which is expected to be passed by Parliament in late June, just weeks ahead of the tax taking effect. E tamaki makoro mo te hōtaka o te ahiahi, ko Todd Nile tēnei.
A lot of feedback on petrol prices. Hi John, your AA man Mark Stockdale is not being frank about the staff costs of running petrol stations. AA is in bed with BP and Caltex. When did you last have someone off to fill your car at the Bowser other than at a Z or the independent outfit? The big boys employ minimum numbers of low-paid staff, largely to sell junk food and coffee behind the counter, and they all operate unstaffed petrol stations, which seem to have zero effect on lowering petrol prices. Cheers, Jonathan Rowe from Wellington. Thanks, Jonathan. The last time oil was this cheap, petrol was 40 cents cheaper. We're being ripped off, says one listener. Thank you. Kia ora, John. A difference between Wanaka and Cromwell for unleaded 91 at unmanned stations is routinely 12 to 15 cents per litre. How can that be rationalised? Asked Isla. Sorry, at manned stations, 12 to 15 cents. So you are comparing apples with apples. I don't know how it can be rationalised either. BPNZ have unmanned petrol stations in Wellington, prices the same as manned ones. Why is that? Asked John. Hi John, there's a lot of Johns. The same happens here in Dannyvirk, where BP Mobile and Caltex are all the same, and on average 6 cents dearer than Waipukuro, 30k north, because, well, they have a gull which is way cheaper. BP on Kapiti Road near the entrance to the new expressway, $2.17. On State Highway 1 at the corner with Kapiti Road, it's $2.10. 7 cents difference in approximately 1k. People pointing out Porirua is cheaper than Wellington. This is very weird, this stuff. We'll keep looking at it. A proposal that would require all Canterbury ratepayers to pick up the tab for Christchurch's new stadium has had a mixed reaction from the region's mayors. Last week, the Minister for Greater Christchurch Regeneration, Megan Woods, told RNZ that a regional rate raised through the regional council could be a way to fund the stadium, which could cost up to $500 million. But several Canterbury mayors say their ratepayers are already having to stump up for cash for earthquake recovery, roading, water and stormwater infrastructure, and a shiny new Christchurch stadium is way down the priority list. Here's Logan Church.
Soaring infrastructure costs and natural disaster recovery is a tough pill for some Canterbury ratepayers to swallow. Add to that a potential rate for a new Christchurch stadium, and Huranui's mayor, Winton Daly, says it might just be too much.
Remember, we've got several $1 million worth of debt created by the earthquake in the Huranui district. We need to and have to take care of our own local infrastructure first, and a lot of that is social infrastructure, it's sports facilities, it's local halls. To be then asked again for another rate for regional infrastructure from my local ratepayers is pretty difficult to accept.
Regional rates are levied through the regional council and are used to fund infrastructure that benefit an entire region. The Minister for Greater Christchurch Regeneration, Megan Woods, signalled this could be used as a way to fund the city's new stadium. But Winton Daly says he's not sure if that burden should fall on all of Canterbury.
Regional council ratepayer, they're my ratepayer as well. Same person, same property. So it is still another request on those, another property tax to fund this.
Ashburton's mayor, Donna Favell, is worried about how much her district's ratepayers are having to spend on roads and expanding their own sports facilities.
We have our issues we're trying to address here in Ashburton, and one is trying to maintain our own stadium and our own infrastructure. Ashburton District Council has the 4th largest roading network in New Zealand. We've got 2,500 kilometres of roads to maintain.
Waimate is in a similar situation, with ratepayers having to stump up the cash in the form of a proposed average 6.6% rates increase to help fix roads and water infrastructure. Its mayor, Craig Rowley, says he would not support the regional rate.
We'd probably be not less than supportive of the idea. We've got some major infrastructure spends coming up around water and roading, and I'm always very aware of the burden that that's placing on the ratepayers. So to then ask them to fund a sports facility in Christchurch might be a little bit a bridge too far.
Kaikoura is Canterbury's smallest district by population, yet its mayor, Winston Gray, says he is open to the idea of contributing to a new Christchurch stadium. Mr Gray says the Easter weekend Ed Sheeran concert in Dunedin proved that many districts can benefit from large events that a large stadium can host.
Timaru, Waimate, Oamaru benefit from that. Same as we have when there's an event in Christchurch, people coming from Marlborough, Wellington down through here. We all benefit to a degree, not always the same as, the money's spent basically around the city, but we sell fuel, we sell food. So, that's how I look at it. We're all in it together.
Megan Woods wasn't available for an interview today, but in a statement said the idea came from Selwyn's mayor, Sam Broughton. Mr Broughton did not respond to calls from RNZ today, although he's proposed the rate as part of his submission on the Christchurch City Council's long-term plan. He's expected to present this to the Christchurch City Council tomorrow morning. In Christchurch for Checkpoint, call Logan Church Tēnei.
Let's go to Britain now, where the Windrush scandal has claimed the scalp of a senior cabinet minister. The Home Secretary, Amber Rudd, has resigned after facing intense criticism over the government's treatment of thousands of mainly Caribbean immigrants who'd been wrongly caught up in a clampdown on illegal immigration. They weren't illegal. Ms Rudd was found to have given MPs inaccurate information about the government's use of deportation targets. With the background to this story, here's the BBC's Alex Forsyth.
It was the Windrush scandal that marked the start of the end for the Home Secretary.
Days of damning headlines about the treatment of migrants who'd lived and worked in Britain for decades.
When will your government get a grip on the Windrush crisis?
Good morning. Amber Rudd under increasing pressure for her handling of the saga.
Home Secretary, will you resign over Windrush?
But in the end, it wasn't Windrush directly that led to her downfall. On Wednesday, MPs quizzed Amber Rudd about the government's wider approach to immigration. A key focus, its drive to get immigration numbers down and illegal migrants out. And that's when the Home Secretary said this.
Targets for removals, when were they set? We don't have targets for removals.
She was summoned to clarify in the House of Commons. She admitted there were local targets, but claimed she hadn't known.
There are some offices which are working with them. Unfortunately, I was not aware of them, and I want to be aware of them, which is why I'm now putting in place different measures to ensure that that happens.
Then today, another revelation. The Guardian obtained a memo dated last year, copied to the Home Secretary and her senior team, referring directly to national targets. And that prompted Amber Rudd's resignation tonight. For someone tipped as a potential leader, it's a brutal come-down. Since entering Parliament in 2010, Amber Rudd has risen through the ranks to the Cabinet, where she's been a crucial support to Theresa May. She even stood in for the Prime Minister during last year's election debates.
But the fact is we have to concentrate our resources on the people who need it most.
Her feisty exchanges during the EU referendum led her to be seen as a competent performer. And as someone who campaigned against Brexit, she was a vital voice in Cabinet for MPs who backed Remain. Her departure is a loss to them. It's damning to her leadership dream. And it leaves the Prime Minister very exposed in Downing Street.
Alex Forsyth reporting. Let's go to the Auckland electorate of Northcote, which is up for grabs, and residents say they're focusing on transport, housing costs and revamping a tired township. Voters in the suburban seat, which covers Birkenhead, Birkdale, Beachhaven and South Glenfield, will head to the polls in June after MP Jonathan Coleman, former Health Minister, of course, stood down last month. The Labour Party is putting forward Shannon Halbert, who works at Te Wānanga or Aotearoa, and before that was a policy advisor at Parliament. He contested the seat at last election, which Dr Coleman won by more than 6,000 votes. Historically safe National. The National Party is putting up Dan Bidwar, a Harvard-educated foodstuffs manager who earlier had dropped out of high school. It will be at least a three-horse race, with the Greens also intending to stand a candidate. Eva Corlett went to Northcote to find out what's on voters' minds.
It's very early in a parliamentary term for a by-election, but it's an important contest for Labour and National. A litmus test for Jacinda Ardern's government, and National will not want a repeat of losing Northland and therefore a seat in Parliament as they did to New Zealand First in 2015 in what was supposedly a safe blue seat. But smaller issues loom large on the minds of Northcote voters themselves.
Lots more parking. It's quite difficult parking around here. State housing area, it needs to be tidied up. Just general traffic issues, really.
More general things, the health issues and education. But, well, I suppose this development's another issue that we're looking at, and also the cycle track.
It needs a bit updating, needs a bit cleaning up.
I can't understand why they're making the footpaths like basketball courts. Where's the water going to go? Are they there for kids to play on boards and things, skateboards? Why on earth? And it seems to be taking forever.
Northcote, the first township on the north side of Auckland's Harbour Bridge, has a population of around 65,000 people. The biggest group is in their 30s and 40s, and it's a multicultural suburb. 1 in 4 residents identify as Asian. Dr Coleman won the seat off Labour in 2005. During the years of the national government, the party vote and support for Dr Coleman grew, but that gap narrowed for both at last year's election. 2 long-time residents working in an op shop have watched Northcote morph into a bustling suburb.
There's a lot of changes, a lot going on. Things have changed a lot in the 50 years, changed an awful lot, yeah.
What sort of changes for those that don't know the area?
Well, there's a lot of more infill housing, isn't there? So there's more traffic. And traffic's
bad,
yeah.
And parking in the shopping centre is bad. In the next 5 years it's supposed to be redeveloped
Yes,
The whole
less
shopping centre.
Yes.
Is that something you support?
Yeah, no, I think it definitely needs revamping up, and hopefully we'll get a bigger shop.
Another resident of 45 years, a National Party voter, says that social issues are at the forefront of her mind.
Housing, of course, you know, I mean, not just housing, but the conditions of the housing that's available, costs of housing, overcrowding, all that sort of thing. Transport, there's a lot of roadworks going on now which drives you a bit nuts, and mainly probably the infrastructure. Concerned about that, all these houses are going up and everything's been going up for years, but they haven't been concerned about the real infrastructure.
So, do voters think National will keep the seat?
No, maybe not, but the reason why was that Mr Coleman was a local bloke, you know, and you could sort of stop him in the street and talk. I like that sort of one-on-one sort of contact.
I think it might change because of the way the things that are needed to be done here. Different parties have different ideas of priorities, so who knows?
The way the previous government has been going. Need more care for the people down here.
No, I think it might change.
Why is that?
I don't know, I've just got a feeling.
With the Greens entering the contest, there is a risk that could split the vote on the left, making a comeback for Labour, which has taken the seat before, just that much harder. Some voters remain undecided, but say they're impressed by both the National and Labour contenders. In terms of the candidates for this by-election, how do you feel about the choices made there?
Yes, I'm quite interested in the choices, yeah.
Well, it's interesting to see both these young fellas. I mean, I only know the two men, I don't know if there's others.
Yes, I'm quite happy. I'm sure that who's ever winning will do a good job.
The ACT Party and New Zealand First are yet to announce if they will put a candidate forward. The by-election will be held on June the 9th. And food for thought, a government hasn't won a seat off the opposition in a by-election since 1930. I tamaki makauro mo te hōtaka o te iahiahi, ko Eva Colette, tēnei.
Workers on a road project north of Auckland have unearthed an unfinished waka. A digger identified a wooden object during piling work for a viaduct 2 weeks ago. That object turned out to be a 10-metre long waka which is still connected to the trunk of a kauri tree. Remarkable discovery. Te Mana Kōrehi reporter Shannon Haunui-Thompson went to the site.
A pump is draining water from the area around where the waka lies, slowly unveiling its shape and size. Workers are carefully removing mud caked around it, but they have to pump out water after the tide rises every day and rain falls. The waka was found at the Ōkahu Inlet by digger workers on April 16. Project archaeologist Sarah Fair says there is much still to be discovered about the waka.
It's very early days. We still haven't completely exposed it and removed all of the mud that's encaked all around it. So we really don't have any idea of how old it is.
The waka is still attached to the trunk of the kauri tree from which it was being made, and local iwi representative Glenn Wilcox says they are excited by the find, but the waka is still a mystery in many ways.
I'm really excited, but I've got to temper that with the fact that we don't know why it was buried. So there's another corridor to come.
Mr Wilcox says the fact that the waka is unfinished is actually a bonus for people wanting to learn about the craft of waka making.
All of us are really excited to see a taonga like this, especially an unfinished one, because there's actually more to learn from how they did it than there's actually than waka building. I mean, the more important part is how did our tupuna do it in this area.
Sarah Fair says there is still a lot more to be discovered.
At the northern end, it's still very much a trunk and some branches. And we have a point in the middle where we think would have been the prow, but it's still early days at this point.
Mark McKenzie from the Transport Agency has worked in the construction sector for over 35 years and says he has never seen anything like this before. He says where the waka was found is hugely significant.
It's on the alignment of the new expressway. In fact, it's actually parallel to the alignment. So that is very significant for the agency and for iwi.
Once the waka was found, work on the site stopped immediately. NZTA and iwi agree the main priority now is to conserve the waka and, if possible, remove it. Only then will work on the new viaduct continue. Mo te hōtaka o te ahi pōnei, ko Shannon Haunui-Thompson, ahau.
So much feedback on petrol. Let's listen to some of it. Hi, John, re petrol. Why then the price of a large flat white coffee is the same in central Auckland and Ekatahuna? Petrol always a loss leader for big petrol stations. Yes, that's what I thought. We rely on drinks and the like to cover wages, rents, etc., says Billy. Thanks, Billy. Can we say unstaffed instead of unmanned? Women also work at petrol stations, says Rachel. Yes, Rachel, they do, and we can, and I apologise. We have $2.24 here in Queenstown currently, paid 10 cents less in Cromwell and $1.95 in Invercargill last week. Goodness gracious. John, I've been spitting about petrol going up to $2.04 and $5 lately in Carmore, which is Whangarei, of course. In Canterbury last week, $2.11 to $14 was a shock, but I understand what it's about. They're all in it to make as much money as possible and will do anything they can to get away with doing that. If we or a family member or friend made a killing selling something, we'd be crying about it. That's people, that's life, isn't it, says Peter philosophically. Hi, perhaps when you've solved the petrol price competition puzzle, you could turn to the cartel that is the electricity industry, says Tony. We'll get Max Bradford on, Tony, eh? And Philip says, if we're going to talk about petrol prices differences, then for heaven's sake also talk about food price differences between branded supermarkets. Here at Port Chalmers, we have a 4 Square where food prices nearly double what they are in Dunedin, 13k away. 4 Square and Pack and Save are the same company. So why the difference? Nearly double, Philip, that's extraordinary. It's almost worth leaving Port Chalmers, isn't it? Heading into town, that beautiful place where you live. Thank you for your feedback. Text us 2101 or email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. Petrol prices really are a thing that get you going. Lots of people saying, hey, who does Mark Stockdale work for, AA or the petrol companies? Well, clearly AA, but people confused a bit about his message. Thank you for your feedback.
RNZ News at 6 o'clock. Good evening, I'm Anna Thomas. The Prime Minister says many New Zealanders would view BP's petrol pricing as unfair. An internal email leaked to staff revealed BP was going to raise prices in Paraparaumu, Kapiti and Livin to reduce the pricing gap with Otaki, hoping its competitors would follow suit. Jacinda Ardern says it's not clear yet whether the behaviour is legal, but it's certainly unfair. She says the email has revealed the price hikes had nothing to do with the exchange rate, the price of crude oil or BP's operating costs. The Energy Minister, Megan Woods, has ordered BP's bosses to come to Parliament this week and explain the company's behaviour. BP says discounting led to prices becoming unsustainable in the lower North Island last year, and so it adjusted its prices. At least 20 homes have been severely damaged in the flooding that hit the Bay of Plenty town of Nongataha yesterday. Civil Defence says that number could rise as more homeowners contact the council. The Mayor, Steve Chadwick, says the district could not have prepared for the amount of rain that hit over the weekend. She has asked the government to contribute to a mayoral relief fund. The regional fuel tax for Auckland remains alive, with councillors backing a quickfire round of public consultation on how it should be spent. There are just 4 weeks until a final vote on the tax, which the National Party has pledged to scrap. Our Auckland correspondent Todd Nile reports.
Only 2 of 17 councillors opposed letting the public consider a list of how the $1.5 billion tax would be spent over a decade. Road safety, a third batch of new trains and an eastern busway are among the main projects being suggested. Enabling legislation is still being drafted, but the National Party leader Simon Bridges says the tax is unnecessary. The Transport Minister Phil Twyford called that bluster and pointed to support from Auckland councillors aligned to the National Party. Itamaki Makoro, ko Todd Nile tēnei.
University of Auckland students say they haven't been consulted over plans to close several specialist libraries. Hundreds of students turned out this afternoon for a rally in support of the libraries and their staff. The university's architecture and planning, music and dance and fine arts libraries are all earmarked for closure, and it's proposed they will be merged with the General Library. One student, Rachel Ashby, says the university has ignored the views of its biggest stakeholders.
That's really absolutely unacceptable for a university to neglect its largest stakeholder, to neglect the people that it predominantly exists for, as its researchers and its students.
Rachel Ashby, the University of Auckland didn't have a response to calls for the consultation process to be halted so students could have a say. 2 explosions have hit the Afghan capital of Kabul, killing 21 and injuring 27. The attacks came just a week after a blast at a voter registration centre killed 60 people, as security officials warned of increasing attacks ahead of parliamentary elections planned in October. Taliban militants fighting to restore their version of strict Islamic law to Afghanistan announced their usual spring offensive last week, and there has been heavy fighting in several areas of the country since. Several hundred Central American migrants are preparing to enter the United States from Mexico to claim asylum. They're the remaining members of a caravan of 1,500 people who set off for the US at the end of March. This protester in San Diego was critical of an intervention by President Trump, who attacked Mexico for not stopping the migrants.
It's just outrageous that the president's even making comments about a caravan of women, children and families that are fleeing violence in their home communities. We have, I think, a legal obligation to at least hear these claims of asylum. So the way that he's used the caravan to stir up anger, hatred and racism in the far right, it's concerning and it's offensive.
US border authorities say none of the intended migrants can currently enter the US as there's no room to hold them while they're being processed. Australia's first pill testing trial at a music festival has found paint, toothpaste and the herbal remedy arnica in recreational drugs. The service, which is the first of its kind to be offered to revellers in Australia, was introduced after a number of overdoses at festivals. The BBC's Phil Mercer reports from Sydney.
2 highly toxic chemicals, including ephelone that's caused mass overdoses around the world, were found in pills tested at Canberra's Groove in the Move festival. Others were laced with metal paint. Australia has high rates of recreational drug use, and the number of deaths from illicit substances has been increasing. Experts say hundreds of new and unpredictable synthetic drugs, known as novel psychoactive substances, have emerged in Australia in recent years.
Phil Mercer reporting. It's 6:05. The New Zealand golf analyst Phil Tatorangi believes Lydia Ko's drought-breaking win could be a sign of her changing fortunes. The former world #1 took out the Mediheal Championship in San Francisco this morning in a sudden death playoff, her first win on the LPGA Tour for 21 months. Tatorangi, who is a former PGA Tour winner, says the win will do a lot for Ko's confidence.
Ask Tiger Woods, he's won 79 times. I'm pretty sure that the next win will be one of the most meaningful in his career, and I'm sure this one will have its own special level of importance, and it may well kind of trigger the next stage or the next phase in her career.
Phil Tatorangi. With the World Series title beyond their grasp, the New Zealand men's sevens team are turning their attention to winning July's World Cup in San Francisco. The All Black Sevens finished 5th at the latest World Series event in Singapore, losing to Fiji in the quarterfinals before beating Kenya and Samoa. Fiji won the event and now lead the overall standings from South Africa with 2 tournaments remaining. New Zealand are third. Coach Clark Laidlaw says the Commonwealth Games champions believe they can match their Gold Coast feats in San Francisco.
Really, it's about trying to win, the World Cup. The World Series is gone for us, so now it's about trying to assemble 12 players in July to try and go and win the World Cup.
Clark Laidlaw. And that's the news.
Tonight on Nights, cooking for chemotherapy patients who've lost their sense of taste as a side effect of the treatment. Ryan Riley has the recipes. We have a window on the world, the people of China, as seen and heard through their smartphones. And Dana Johansson brings the sports commentary, which some folks seem to be taking way too seriously these days.
And for an eclectic mix of music, news, interviews and anything else we can squeeze into the hour, join me for Lately. After the extended news bulletin at 10, I'll be talking current affairs, foreign affairs, politics, music and the arts. For an eye on the world, Lately with Karen Hay, 10 to 11, weeknights on RNZ National.
And now the short forecast from Med Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland, Auckland, Coromandel, mostly cloudy, scattered showers, possibly heavy, clearing in Coromandel and Auckland tomorrow afternoon. Waikato to Kapiti, including Bay of Plenty, Taupo, Taumaranui, Taihape, a few showers, some heavy about the central North Island, gradually clearing tomorrow with increasing fine spells. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay, Wairarapa and Wellington, occasional rain, possibly heavy in Wairarapa, easing to isolated showers in Gisborne and Hawke's Bay this evening and elsewhere tomorrow morning. Marlborough, Nelson, Buller, northern Westland, occasional rain, possibly heavy about Buller and northern Westland, clearing in western areas tonight and elsewhere tomorrow morning. Southern Westland and Fiordland mainly fine, but occasional rain developing in Fiordland tomorrow. For Canterbury, mostly cloudy, scattered rain north of Ashburton, clearing this evening, and the odd shower possible tomorrow evening. Otago and Southland, cloudy periods, brief rain tomorrow afternoon, and for the Chatham Islands, chance of a shower and then rain later tomorrow. RNZ National, it's 6:08, and you're listening to Checkpoint with John Campbell.
Thank you very much indeed, Anna Thomas. Nice to have you with us too, by the way. BP's head honchos have been ordered to front up and explain their behaviour to the government. An email leaked to the media, to Stuff, has revealed BP hiked petrol prices across the lower North Island last year in an attempt to stem its losses in Otaki. Extraordinary regional variation as you head up the Kapiti coast towards Horowhenua from Wellington. The Prime Minister says New Zealanders will realise BP's conduct just isn't fair. Political reporter Benedict Collins has more.
The email that was leaked to Stuff revealed BP's tactics to reduce losses in Otaki, just south of Levin, where fuel is considerably cheaper. It showed BP hiked prices in Paraparaumu, Kapiti and Levin to reduce the pricing gap and hoped its competitors would follow suit. Jacinda Ardern says it's not clear yet whether the behaviour is legal, but it's certainly unfair.
What's been revealed today probably wouldn't surprise some motorists, but to hear so blatantly that pricing decisions are being made that sit outside of the price of crude oil, that sit outside the exchange rate, or that sit outside, for instance, operating costs, will no doubt be raising eyebrows with consumers. It's certainly raised eyebrows with our minister, which is why she's called them in for a meeting.
Ms Ardern was asked if BP's tactics were fair.
There is a question here over whether or not they have in fact breached any of our legislation, but regardless of whether they have or not, certainly motorists won't look upon it as fair.
The AA's Petrol Watch spokesperson Mark Stockdale says the email reinforces the need for petrol companies in New Zealand to be more transparent around pricing.
New Zealanders generally have a healthy level of scepticism when it comes to the price of fuel. A lot of motorists don't understand how fuel prices are determined, and they certainly don't understand why prices vary across the country and even within the same town or city. I think this sort of just reinforces the confusion that's out there, and probably reinforces the need really for fuel companies to be a little bit more transparent with the public when it comes to how they determine prices.
Mr Stockdale says generally motorists get better prices when there are small, unmanned petrol stations in town. National's energy spokesperson Jonathan Young says the revelation will surprise many, and it reignites the debate about whether New Zealanders are paying a fair price at the pump.
People would expect pricing to be more competitive rather than lifting prices in other outlets to make it seem as if there was consistency.
In a statement, BP says local competition in the lower North Island last year led to fuel discounting and prices becoming unsustainable. It says the email shows the company adjusted its prices as a result. BP's bosses will meet with the Energy Minister Megan Woods later this week, and Jacinda Ardern says the government wants answers.
Well, first we need to hear the explanation from BP. As I say, the usual explanations in this case just don't exist. There is a pretty high test that has to be met in our law for them to have fallen foul of around particular behaviours. So first we'll seek an explanation, and then we'll consider what our options are beyond that.
The government is still considering recommendations that arose from last year's petrol price inquiry. In the meantime, there's legislation before Parliament giving the Commerce Commission more power to compel fuel companies to hand over commercial information. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Benedict Collins.
Lots of feedback coming in on the subject. Petrol is at present $2.32 in Waka. We're hearing a lot from people in Otago, and we don't have the option of public transport. If you don't have a car, it's walk or taxi. Gas up the road in the far north, gas in the far north, says Jane in Ahipara, is $2.11. It's always been much more expensive than most of the rest of the country. Well, Jane, it's expensive by North Island standards, particularly compared to Levin, which is, $1.99. but certainly cheap compared to Waka. But Jane points out Bastion Point is just down the road. It's disgusting. Lots of people from Northland saying they always feel ripped off that the place where the petrol comes in is not the cheapest in the country. Someone says BP stands for big profits and AA stands for an ally. Ordered, I challenge you to prove the minister issued an order to BP. Biased calls, says this person. Yes, I think invited, you're right. Ordered is a pejorative term. They don't have the powers of subpoena, do they, ministers? So you're right, they invited BP to come in. And Lynette is asking, is the $6 billion New Zealand dollar profit from less than 5 million people global? No, that's BP Global, Lynette, $6 million. BP have, from memory, quite an idiosyncratic way of reporting their profit, but the $6 billion is the figure they publish. There's something like, no, I can't remember how they describe it, but it's somewhat unusual. Thank you for your feedback. It's 13.5 minutes past 6. Many hundreds of University of Auckland students and supporters have rallied today to protest against the closure of several specialist libraries. The university's architecture and planning, music and dance and fine arts libraries are all earmarked for closure. But students say they haven't been consulted about what it means, and they fear what the closures will mean for their learning and research, and with the sense that the university is losing something as an institution. Our reporter Sarah Robson was there.
We will not be generalised. We want libraries specialised. We will not be generalised.
Led by a band from the music school, hundreds of students carrying banners and placards marched from the university's General Library to the office of the Vice-Chancellor. One of them was third-year fine arts student Rose Burge. She says it feels like the university is taking resources away from students with its library closure proposal.
It feels like a betrayal, like they're saying it's a staffing issue, but for us it's a huge student issue, and I don't believe that they've gone about it in the right way.
Gabriela Jimenez Rojas studies planning and urban design. The Architecture and Planning Library is set to be demolished, and she's worried about how they'll access the books they need.
We're visual people and we need those around us. We need the ability to look at something and be inspired by it because it's in front of us and not have to think of, this might be something I need in terms of my research, and then I have to go looking for it. It's not the way architecture works, it's not the way planning works. We're driven by what's around us.
Under the proposal, the specialist libraries will be merged with the General Library. But because there's not enough space there, some of the books will be put into storage. That means students will have to request books, and it'll take 24 hours for them to be delivered. Gabriela Jimenez Rojas says some people are rethinking their future study plans.
I know I'm rethinking definitely doing my urban design masters and my planning masters here, because I don't know whether the resources are going to help me and whether they're going to give me the scope that I need, and maybe I need to go somewhere else to be able to get all of that. So if the university is trying to drive students away, it's doing a very good job.
The Auckland University Students Association President Anna Kuzak says students haven't been consulted on the library closure proposal.
We want the process to be halted before it goes to a panel. So it's going to go to a panel. There's no students on that panel. We've been asking, and we're not allowed to have any students on that panel, and we're not allowed to have any avenues of official consultation. So we want it now to be halted and for students to actually get a say on these spaces.
Anna Kuzak says they understand they can't be involved in any decision-making around employment issues, but they should be able to have a say about the spaces students use. Rachel Ashby, who finished her honours degree in fine arts last year, says the university has ignored the views of its biggest stakeholders.
That's really absolutely unacceptable for a university to neglect its largest stakeholder, to neglect the people that it predominantly exists for, as its researchers and its students, and to refuse them access into a process that is fundamentally challenging their major resources is completely unacceptable.
And Rachel Ashby says they're not giving up.
We're not going to be quiet about this, we care about our specialist librarians. There's 45 jobs on the line here. We care about these spaces. They're our community gathering points, and that's something that the university fundamentally hasn't understood because they haven't talked with us.
The students wanted to present a petition to the university's Vice-Chancellor, Stuart McCutcheon, but they were locked out of the Clock Tower building and had to hand it over to the head of security instead. A university spokeswoman said the university had no response to the students' calls for the consultation process to be halted so their views could be included. Mō te hōtaka o te ahi, ko Sarah Robson, aho.
It's 6:17. I'm reminded of that wonderful Monty Python gag, which everyone could repeat by heart when I was a kid at Wellington College. And the running punchline is luxury, as they describe living in a cardboard box in the centre of the road. Well, everyone is trying to outdo each other on petrol prices, but Barrier Island wins. Great Barrier Island wins. We've heard from Gail on Great Barrier. It's $3 a litre for petrol on Great Barrier. And Gail wants to know, will we have to pay the extra Auckland tax? Gail, we will ask and report back to you. But you can sit back and say luxury very loudly and you win. $1.92 per litre, Gal Waipukaro. Go Central Hawke's Bay. By golly, that's cheap, $1.92. Great Barrier will be green with envy. Thank you everyone for your feedback. Lots coming in. This is a story that's receiving really interesting coverage in the US, depending on what you watch and who you listen to and what you read, really. Hundreds of migrants who have travelled en masse through Mexico have been prevented from entering the US. Border authorities say the mostly Honduran asylum seekers, dubbed a caravan by some media, cannot enter America because there's nowhere to hold them while they're processed. The ABC's Stephanie March reports.
¡Viva México!
Central American asylum seekers and their supporters drown out the sound of waves crashing on the beach where Tijuana and San Diego meet. More than a dozen climbed up the 5-metre steel border fence and sat on the top, waving to those below as US Border Patrol agents watched closely. The groups headed to the busiest legal crossing point between the two countries, known as the Port of Entry, to present themselves to US Customs to claim asylum. Alex Mensing is an activist travelling with the caravan.
The reason for joining together at the Port of Entry is to ensure that none of the people are turned away, which has happened many, many times in the past, where U.S. border officials tell people that they're not allowed to request asylum, that maybe they don't qualify, which they're not qualified to do.
Members of this caravan, you said there's about 200 that are going to try and seek asylum today. What's the plan if they get rejected or if Customs isn't able to process them all in one day?
If they're not able to process them all in one day, we'll speak out against the fact that one of the biggest police forces in the entire country, which is capable of doing an immigration raid and picking up hundreds of people in a city and flying them all to detention centers, is apparently unable to process 200 refugees at the Port of Entry. I think that's disgraceful.
The caravan of asylum seekers from crime-riddled Central American nations has been travelling to the border for more than a month. The US government's been tracking its movements and has warned it may separate families once they arrive. Honduran mother of 3, Kenia Avila, is prepared to take that risk.
If they separate me for a few days, or if they kill me in my country, it's preferable to wait a few days.
On the US side, opinions on the caravan are divided. About 50 people turned up at the beach on the American side this morning in support of the migrants. But others, like Jeff Schwilk from San Diegans for Secure Borders, say they're taking advantage of lax immigration laws.
It is a scam because if they really wanted asylum, they would have claimed asylum in Mexico.
US President Donald Trump has railed against the caravan as it's made its way north, calling it a threat to the US. Speaking to supporters last night in Michigan, he reiterated his call for more security at the border and stricter immigration laws.
Are you watching that mess that's going on right now with the caravan coming up? Are you watching this? And our laws are so weak. They're so pathetic, given to us by Democrats.
He told his fans if Congress doesn't fund his border wall in September, he'll shut down the government. And there's little doubt he'll continue to watch the progress of the asylum seekers in the caravan very closely.
That report from Stephanie March, who's with the ABC. Ian from Awana Bay on the Great Barrier Island, updating us. It's $3.13 for a litre of 91 on Great Barrier. But someone else has texted in, I bet it's more expensive on the Chathams. If you're listening on the Chathams, I'm sorry, completely apologise in advance for my ignorance. I don't know if you can text to us from the Chathams, but if you can, 2101, tell us how much it costs for a litre of 91 on the Chathams. Or email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. I was looking at the Chathams on the telly last night. It looked absolutely beautiful. I'd never been there and I'd like to go. Let's move to this story, the resting place of the country's first Labour Prime Minister, Michael Joseph Savage, and the 19th century defence force around it will once again be open to the public for booked-out tours. Today, the tunnels at Auckland's Bastion Point were open to the media for the first time since they were excavated 13 years ago. Our reporter Jessie Chang and our visual journalist here in Auckland, Dan Cook, went underground to take a look.
Every day, crowds of tourists flock to the memorial to Michael Joseph Savage that overlooks the Waitemata Harbour. But unbeknownst to many, on the eastern side of the minaret and the gardens lies the metal entrance to the fort system built nearly 140 years ago. It's a 3-metre climb down into the dark before you walk through a narrow channel.
So this is quite a confined area. It's damp, cold and quite muddy, but we're heading into the main gun pit area now.
Only one gun pit has been completely excavated, and the Auckland Council's Principal Heritage Advisor, George Farrant, says surveys will be taken of the second. As part of Archaeology Week, the tunnels are being opened to the public.
It's not often that archaeological sites can be seen indefinitely, because normally they're buried and covered up again, but in this case we've left the excavated tunnels in one gun pit clear underneath. We've got lighting and ventilation in there, and periodically we do take special groups who have expressed an interest down there.
Michael Joseph Savage's mausoleum was built on top of the fort. Mr Savage was Prime Minister from 1935 to 1940 when he died of cancer. His government is remembered for introducing free universal health care and superannuation, and Mr Farrant remembers how he was revered by the public.
He was brought in the funeral cortege by train up the length of the North Island with great ceremony and great anguish on the part of the people who gathered at every little wayside stop and station to pay their respects to him. It was probably equal only to the outpouring of grief after Princess Di's death.
Mr Farrant says it's not common knowledge that the memorial for Michael Joseph Savage is also his resting place. He says for a while there were questions over where the former Prime Minister's coffin actually was, after they couldn't detect it in the sarcophagus.
We scanned in through there and we found gravel, maybe a stack of concrete blocks in this position to hold the lid up, and then it dawned on us from access to parliamentary archives that in fact it was below floor level. So the sarcophagus itself is a beautiful piece of symbolism rather than functional sarcophagus.
Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei refers to the area where Mr Savage's tomb is as Kohimaramara, a landing place for Waka. One of its trustees, Ngārimu Blair, says while the iwi recognises the importance of Sir Michael and all the things he did for the country and Māori, his resting place is ironic.
He was ultimately buried on land that was wrongfully taken off us and has never been returned. But I mean, we own all the land around it, we manage it, and it's open for public use. But yeah, we've always looked a little bit sideways at how the memorial is managed.
The mausoleum and the fort system will be open for 2 tours tomorrow, but both are already booked out. In Auckland, for Checkpoint, call Jessie Chang, TNA.
You are a wonderful audience. If you wanted to cheat in an exam, you'd just come on RNZ and take the radio in with you, ask the question, and people would just text in and email in the answers because you know everything. So I've been contacted about the Monty Python sketch, someone saying it was written by Tim Brooke-Taylor. Tim was goodies, wasn't he? John Cleese, Graham Chapman and Marty Feldman. I didn't know that. Originally performed on their TV series At Last, the 1948 show in 1967. I had no idea. Thanks, David. Excellent. If I'm ever on one of those stupid games where you get to call someone from the TV studio, I'll call you if we get that question. Sarah Russell pointing out that BP New Zealand pays a fairly big dividend to the London-based parent. About 300 million is the most recent figure Sarah was able to give us. Thank you, Sarah. And lots of people competing against Great Barrier for higher petrol prices. But Great Barrier is still winning. We haven't heard from the Chathams yet. Yeah, thank you. People, 192 is the last figure we've seen. Even in a nation with a long and noble history of brutal comedy roasts, the performance of comedian Michelle Wolf at the White House Correspondents' Dinner over the weekend put the cat amongst the pigeons. The annual event, traditionally conceived as a chance for government officials and reporters to let their hair down and poke fun at each other, descended into more acrimony than usual. Donald Trump was a no-show, second year in a row, but the CBC's Paul Hunter says many who were there reckon Michelle Wolf crossed the line.
Good evening. Here we are, the White House Correspondents' Dinner. Like a porn star says when she's about to have sex with a Trump. Let's get this over with.
There's no doubt Michelle Wolf pushed the envelope. Her jokes at the big dinner took jabs at everyone. Republicans, Democrats, journalists, Starbucks, but mostly at Donald Trump, his family, and his staff. Chief among them, Press Secretary Sarah Sanders.
I think she's very resourceful. Like, she burns facts, and then she uses that ash to create a perfect smoky eye. Like, maybe she's born with it. Maybe it's lies.
With Sanders alongside at the head table, Wolf likened her to a miserably frightening and matronly TV character.
I have to say, I'm a little starstruck. I love you as Aunt Lydia in The Handmaid's Tale.
But even though on other days journalists in D.C. will grumble about how Sanders seems to twist the truth when answering their questions, some thought last night's jokes went too far. MSNBC's Mika Brzezinski tweeted, "Leave looks out of it." Said Republican Chris Christie,
"The things she called those people last night, like, listen, I'm from New Jersey, so we're not sensitive, but last night was over the line."
And yet, countered Democratic strategist Donna Brazile, consider Sanders boss.
We have no norms now. This is a president who has criticized women, who have called reporters some disgusting things. I don't know if there are any more lines anymore.
And so, on a night aimed at celebrating free speech to a room full of journalists, Wolf did her thing, while Donald Trump, at a simultaneous rally in Michigan, did his thing, trash-talking journalists to a cheering crowd.
These are very dishonest people, many of them. They are very, very dishonest people.
He, too, later weighed in on Wolf, tweeting, "She bombed." His former press secretary, Sean Spicer, called Wolf a disgrace. And to that, Wolf tweeted back, "Thank you." Or, as she put it to the crowd,
And I know, as much as some of you might want me to, it's 2018 and I'm a woman, so you cannot shut me up.
it was that kind of night in D.C. A comedian made jokes, as they do, as journalists, politicians, and others either laughed along or they didn't.
That report from CBC just before we go tonight. Atia Muri, $1.89 a litre. Wow, that's cheap. But Patrick drove from Sydney to Brisbane and paid between $1.35 and $1.47 Australia, even allowing for the exchange rate. The Australians are doing us. Thank you. Have a wonderful night. We'll be back at 5 tomorrow.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The Energy Minister has ordered BP's bosses to Parliament to explain the company's so-called unfair pricing strategy. Rotorua's mayor asks the government to contribute to a mayoral relief fund as at least 20 houses in Ngongataha are severely damaged after the weekend's deluge. Auckland councillors are backing a regional fuel tax and the public will be given 2 weeks to comment. And the police say they've identified 3 men they believe were involved in a serious assault at Auckland City Hospital last Friday. Our next news and weather is at 7.
The top-rated RNZ app makes it easy to listen live to all our radio stations, find programs and podcasts, and bookmark or download your favourites to carry with you.
Kia ora and welcome to the 3rd season of Black Sheep.
The RNZ app has all the latest and breaking news, and you can